So I'm here today with Dr. DeGennaro with the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society to talk about one of their new initiatives to eradicate acute myeloid leukemia. But I thought I'd start on a personal note. In the summer of 2010, I had just graduated from college, and I was really excited and a little bit nervous to enter the real world, as they say in commencement speeches. And I had dreams of becoming a journalist, but the real world that I found was not exactly the one I'd been hoping for. And at age 22, after months of misdiagnosis for mysteriously lowering blood counts, chronic infections, and exhaustion, my life was interrupted. And the doctor didn't mince words. "You have acute myeloid leukemia," he said to me. And I didn't know what AML meant, but I could tell from the look on his face that it wasn't good. The better half of my 20s has been consumed by cancer treatment. Over the last 3.5 years, I've done dozens of rounds of chemotherapy. I had a life-saving clinical trial and a very harrowing bone marrow transplant with my brother Adam as my donor. And now at age 28, I'm incredibly grateful to be in remission and to be focusing on the life part of that life-interrupted equation. But in all truthfulness, I'm one of the lucky ones. 1 in 4 AML patients survive 5 years past diagnosis, and in the past 40 years, there have been few developments in the treatment of AML. So, Dr. DeGennaro, I was hoping you could start out by telling us just a little bit about what AML is and who it impacts.
So, Leica, thank you, and thanks for sharing your story. It's so inspiring, but you're right. Your experience is not the common one with acute myeloid leukemia. So this is a blood cancer. It affects white blood cells. We'll see about 20,000 patients in the United States this year diagnosed with AML. As you mentioned, the vast majority of them will die of their diagnosis because the treatments that are currently available are over 40 years old. It's a chemotherapy regime. And this disease has been remarkably stubborn to the creation of new advances and new treatments. The disease can affect patients of all ages and both genders, but it tends to occur most frequently in an older population.
And what is the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society doing to help improve those AML patients' outcomes?
We've mounted an initiative to literally change the standard of care for acute myeloid leukemia patients within the next 3 to 5 years. We call it Beat AML. And it's a very comprehensive program. We started out several years ago by funding a genetic study to understand the genetics behind the disease and what mutations actually drive the disease. I think one of the things that came out of that was the fact that AML is not a single disease. It's actually multiple diseases, as many as 10, maybe even more. And so we needed to think about how we would approach treatment. We continue to fund research all around the world in understanding this disease better. Fully 25% of our research budget goes to funding AML research. But I think even more importantly, we've mounted a significant clinical trial to test a whole series of newly available drugs to see whether we can change the way AML is treated.
So what makes the Beat AML trial unique?
Lots of things. First and foremost, the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society is the sponsor of the trial. typically a clinical trial will be sponsored by a pharmaceutical company. But we've decided that it was necessary for LLS to sponsor the trial because we wanted to be certain we could bring all of the players, if you will, in the ecosystem of delivering new drugs to patients together, to work together. And with LLS leading the initiative, we can engage with the FDA in a unique way. We could engage with the pharmaceutical industry in a unique way. We could engage with the academic medical community to be certain that the trial was run efficiently and quickly. After all, patients, we're driven by the sense of urgency of patients. The trial enrolls newly diagnosed AML patients. As you know, most clinical trials enroll patients who have relapsed from their disease or who are refractory to treatment. This trial enrolls newly diagnosed patients over the age of 60, a cohort that is hopefully in the best position to benefit from these new targeted drugs. We immediately study the genetics of the tumor in the patient so that we understand precisely what form of AML the patient has, and we put them on an arm of the trial with a drug that is likely to show benefit for them. Most clinical trials test only one drug at a time. This trial is testing multiple drugs. We have 5 drugs in the trial currently, soon to be as many as 7, ultimately as many as 10. The trial is open in 5 locations around the country now, soon to be 12, ultimately as many as 20. We want to be certain that patients have access to these new therapies as quickly as possible, to the best benefit as possible. And really the goal is, I've said it before, changing the paradigm by which we treat this deadly leukemia.
And how do patients enroll in the trial?
Well, best way is to work through their physician. We've worked in partnership with the American Society of Hematology to be certain physicians know about this trial, where it's open, what the qualifications, what the criteria for enrollment are. As I mentioned, patients over the age of 60 with newly diagnosed AML. We don't have a lot of restrictions on participation in the trial. I think one of the other major benefits of this trial is every patient that meets those qualifications, newly diagnosed and over the age of 60, will see a novel treatment. No patient will be turned away. No patient will receive a placebo. Every patient has an opportunity, based on the genetics of their cancer, to get access to a novel agent. So certainly patients can find out more information at clinicaltrials.gov, or the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society website is probably the best place to go, lls.org. We also have an 800 number that patients can call. It's 800-955-4572 and speak to someone live about getting on this trial.
And we heard Stephanie in the previous session talk about some of the mythologies and misunderstandings surrounding clinical trials, which I know was certainly my experience. So what would you say to a newly diagnosed patient who's considering enrolling in a trial like Beat AML?
So I'm going to echo something that Stephanie said. In many cases, a clinical trial is the best option for patients, particularly today when we can use precision medicine, right? The right drug to the right patient at the right time, and employ some of these new targeted agents rather than the sledgehammer of chemotherapy. And so I do think patients should certainly consider enrolling in a clinical trial. In many cases, it's the best option.
Is there anything else that you'd like to share about the trial?
I think we're on track. We've enrolled close to 60 patients so far. Again, as I mentioned, we could have as many as 500 patients enrolled over the next 3 to 5 years. We're looking to report data out in real time so that we can influence the way these patients are treated more broadly in the community. And looking forward to really making a difference.
Thank you. We're almost out of time, but Dr. DeGennaro will be with us during the cocktail reception and available for questions. And thank you for everything that you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you all.